Sheikh, tell me how, because obviously from then you carried on studying, you carried on learning. Tell me a little bit about how you kind of moved from, that traditional way of learning to becoming like the first place to learn Islam as a university online. Because Islamic Online University, again, another pioneering thing. You were the first guys to do that officially. Like, how did you think even, because you went through a traditional Islamic education with Medina University, like the internet, how did you think about all of that?
Well, you know, I would say that the internet again became an issue of necessity being the mother of invention.
Hmm.
You know, um, after graduating from Medina, doing a master's in Riyadh, which is much more modern, Riyadh University, not King Saud. No, it was King Saud, sorry, but not Imam Ibn Saud University, because there are two major universities there. Imam Ibn Saud was purely Islamic, whereas King Saud had Islamic section, but had other areas, engineering, medicine, and all these other things. So that was a more modern university. I became a teacher at that time, in Islamic school there in Riyadh, called Manarat Riyadh Schools. Um, uh, when I finished my PhD uh, in in, um, in in Riyadh before I left and went to UAE, then I became a university professor or university lecturer. I lectured in university, taught in university in the American University of Dubai for 10 years. In that time, uh, setting up a Department of Islamic Studies and, creating curriculum and all these other kinds of things, the challenges that were involved there. Um, that was all on the ground. But what happened was that the internet was now coming into play, late 90s, early 2000. Um, People were writing me and asking me about where they could study online. And the main university, which was mentioned, you mentioned that we are the first. We're not the first,
Okay.
right? But we're among the first. Or we could say the first, which is truly on Quran and Sunnah, right? Because there was a website called Sunni Path, and people would write me emails and ask me, "What about Sunni Path? Can we study there?" So when I went to Sunni Path and I looked at their program, I realized that it was really Sufi path
Hmm.
as opposed to Sunni path. It was focused on the Sufi approach to uh, Islam as a whole. There were fiqh courses, there were hadith courses, and so on. So I would advise them that I didn't want to say to them, don't go there, because there was nothing else. And to just say to people, no, don't go means don't get that. No, instead, I encouraged them. I said, look, okay, go, you can deal with your fiqh there. Go ahead, you can do your hadith there. But the aqidah, my advice is stay away from the aqidah. Learn your aqidah in your local areas, from your local scholars, because there are issues there.
Hmm.
But the fiqh, basically the damage in fiqh is minor. The damage in hadith is minor. The major area, where the damage would be in the area of aqidah. So I realized I couldn't keep saying this. You know, we have to find an alternative.
Mm.
This is what it came down to. So in the year 2000, I first tried to set up an alternative. I engaged my son, who was studying IT at the time, to set up, the necessary uh, programming and programs and systems, etc. But he was in the early stages of his studies. So what he set up, we quickly outgrew and we didn't have an alternative, and the system was starting to crash. So we had to shut it down. It ran for about a year. It's about the year 2000, 2001. We ran it for about a year. But I knew it needed to be done. The systems that we needed, learning management systems, the video conferencing, these at those days were extremely expensive. You're talking about $60,000, $80,000.
Wow.
Yeah, it was massive numbers. We just, as much as I wanted to do it, it just burned my hands. I I just didn't have that kind of money. I didn't know anybody who would be willing to invest in that kind of money. So, I had to just leave it until basically about 6 years later, my son, by then I'd moved to Qatar. My son contacted me and said, the learning management system is now available. Let's do it, Alhamdulillah. And then within that same year, the video conferencing, WYSIQ, now available, free. Oh, mashallah, alhamdulillah. Then we started the process of setting things up. So the need and the intention was there. We didn't have the financial means to. So in between that same period, I set up a department for Islamic studies in Ajman, Preston University in Ajman. And alhamdulillah, that developed now an English medium curriculum. So that was I was writing during that point, the late 90s, early 2000. I was now writing books which would be useful for English Islamic studies programs, because I recognize, the Arabic, pure Arabic, where people come and study everything in Arabic, they go back home and they teach in their local languages. So all that effort made in Arabic becomes lost, When you talk to those people 10 years later, 15 years later, they're struggling to be able to speak the Arabic. And, so I question the amount of time that was being put in. I think the Arabic is critical, but somehow I felt that it was better to put it simultaneously, that you're learning in your local language and you learn Arabic at the same time. So the learning of Arabic doesn't delay your studies, because many people were spending 2 to 3 years studying Arabic. Then they had to do 4 years to do a bachelor, then another, 4 for masters, because in Medina it was like 4, and then a PhD, which would be like 5. Oh, you're going close to 15 years, just to get a PhD, so it was just not practical. So, having taught now in university, I could see, that a Western styled university, the need to, customize and to summarize and to present this material in a more concise way. So that was the learning period for me to prepare for setting up the university online practically. So on the ground, I did as much as I could on the ground, setting up departments. I also started an Islamic studies program in Qatar. By then I'd moved to Qatar. I also went to India and set up in Chennai the first accredited Islamic University of India.
Wow, didn't know that.
Yeah, that's the first. You mentioned the internet university as the first. No, that wasn't the first, but this one was the first accredited Islamic university in India. It's not the first Islamic university. There are many. In fact, Islamic universities in India, there are thousands. And Islamic university, just really means high school in many of these, right? There's not really universities. They just use the term, Jamia Islamia. They use that term very loosely.